Make sure to follow @afilmkid on Twitter for more content, reviews, and news on future uploads. So, a while ago, but not really a while ago, I reviewed a film by the name of The Night is Short, Walk On Girl, an anime movie directed by Masaaki Yuasa and adapted from Tomihiko Morimi's novel of the same name. The reason I bring up this video is because in it, I said that I had started reading Morimi's other novel, The Tatami Galaxy, which also just so happens to have an anime adaptation of the same name, also directed by Yuasa. In fact, this was made a while before Walk On Girl was animated. I had read the novel first before starting the anime, and after finishing it, I had reserved a special place in my heart for the story because I genuinely just loved the book that much. And so it was safe for me to say that the anime had some pretty big shoes to fill. But I am very happy to say that the anime had passed my expectations, but for rather unexpected reasons. And the reason why I say unexpected is because of just how different both versions are. You see, I'm not one that really likes to complain about changing the source material in an adaptation. Part of adapting something into another medium is trying to make it actually fit said medium, instead of just feeling like the book is being translated into another language. And as long as the core values and themes of that story are still being presented with whatever twists the directors and writers are offering to their version of the story, then you aren't going to hear me complain about them making changes. Simply trying to go for a one-for-one adaptation is obviously not a bad idea, but putting your own spin on things is 100 times more interesting and offers another perspective for the story. So as long as you're still respecting those themes and that core the author intended to be in the material, plot structure is free game. And I have to bring this up and make this clear because the anime and novel are extremely different in how they approach the story. In the novel, there are only like 4 alternate timelines being explored, while the anime obviously has, a couple more than that, hence by the episode count. The 4 timelines fit in the novel because the number 4 itself holds thematic significance, such as the 4.5 Tatami room and the 4 Mochiguma Nakashi holds onto after losing her 5th one. They do explore these worlds in a similar structure, as one chapter in the book is dedicated to one timeline, just as one episode in the anime is dedicated to one timeline. They do that relatively similar, but just about everything else is different. For example, each episode ends and resets the timeline just as they're middling their climactic point. This is partly done because by the end of the season, where you actually see the story reaching its epilogue, you've been hit across the head dozens of times already that Watashi is going to end up at this point every single time. Hinted at both from the conversations Watashi has with Ozu and with the fortune teller. So it doesn't really matter much to actually show his story end until the very end of the show, since it would just make things more repetitive, which would make the message a lot less impactful because then it would just be annoying at that point. Plus, you would have to shift the structure of the story to fit around that idea a lot, since the show is already fast-paced enough. But then we go back to the novel, since there are only 4 chapters and there are no time restraints, the story of each timeline reaches this conclusion at the end of every chapter, showcasing how Watashi will end up in the same spot no matter what, with only minor differences. The path to that point is entirely different, but most of the key elements will always happen, and the end point will always be the same. There's no need to skip past this point since there's less chapters and less timelines, making it so that the ending point is still necessary, with only major differences between all of them being the final chapter, where Watashi and Ozu's conversation at the end flips its roles. In the anime, Watashi's big conversation with Ozu that continuously repeats in every timeline about Ozu's way of love, that conversation is only ever held until the very end of each chapter in the novel. Half of that conversation is held earlier on in the chapter, while the other half of it is saved until the very end. But the anime changes that and just puts them both together, since it fits their version of the story better. This shows how Watashi's self-reflective journey has changed him to be more confident and grateful for the things he has in life in the last episode and in the last chapter, now that the roles have been reversed. The Tatami Galaxy is also just hilarious. Both versions are incredibly funny in different ways. The anime is full of visual metaphors that don't slow down, and the novel has some of the funniest wordplay and imagery I've ever seen. One of my favorite examples comes from the very first chapter, about halfway into it, where Watashi says, "I was so pissed about this, was pissed about that. I had enough piss to fill a swimming pool. Then, when I discovered a cockroach trying to escape to the one piss-free corner of my room, I unleashed the full extent of my rage and the poor thing was crushed to smithereens. And, maybe I just have really dumb toilet humor, but you can't lie and say that that paragraph isn't creative. The Tatami Galaxy was very special to me because of its story and its themes, but one thing that I don't want to undermine is its characters. I want to talk about Watashi later, since what I want to talk about is a bit more personal than most of my usual talk in my videos, but the supporting cast in this show in general is incredibly strong. I specifically enjoy how they approach their development by showing off different aspects of their personalities in the different timelines while still keeping them as basically the same people. Akashi and Ozu are mostly the exact same characters in every episode, with different parts of them being explored, but Watashi's perspective on them almost never changes. But then with characters like Higuchi, Jogasaki, and Hanaki, you're given an entirely different perspective of them based on the differing timelines. Jogasaki in one chapter or in one episode is a completely different person compared to who he is in the previous episode or the next episode, and that's because Watashi's perspective on him has completely changed. Same thing with Higuchi, you'll go from this mysterious demigod to just an older student with some more wisdom than the others and some very weird hobbies. You get a completely different impression of them, but their characters are always the same person. The only thing that truly changes is just how Watashi sees them, making us see them the same way since the story is being told from his perspective. And one thing we know as well is that Watashi himself is always the same person, just making one minor change that he thinks will lead him down a different path just to end up at the same destination he always lands at. Because at the end of the day, he's the same person, so he's always going to find himself in the exact same spot as he always does. I have waited a bit to talk about the visuals, which obviously are another big standout of the anime, for its unique proportions and minimalistic style of detail and color. And the reason I waited is because I've said basically everything I could say in my review of Walk On Girl, but there are some things in the Tatami Galaxy that I appreciate even more. Since I'm assuming this show didn't exactly have the highest budget, Yuasa makes a lot of risky creative choices that end up elevating the show's presentation to a whole nother level. Yuasa and the animators definitely take a lot of their designs and style from the imagery presented within the novel, obviously so, as their designs are one for one with the exaggerated proportions, facial structures, and cartoonish personalities that Watashi describes his peers to have. Once again, going back to the creative imagery of Morimi's novel and writing. There is almost never a moment where Watashi's perspective isn't extremely exaggerated with cynical details, because that's just how he is. One of my favorite examples is here. The owner wore a cranky frown as he prepared to close up, but when he saw Akashi, he beamed. This old fart reminiscent of simmered octopus suddenly looked as soft as the old bamboo cutter must have when he found Princess Kaguya. Akashi had become friends with the owner after working at his stall at the used book fair, and it seems she made a point of stopping by to chat when she was on Kawaramachi Dori. But wow, his melted marshmallow softness was no joke. Compared with his attitude when he threw me out earlier, the difference was night and day. And you can go to a random page at any point in the novel and find examples of these creative and over-the-top descriptions of people and environments. Going back to the anime though, the creatives behind the show make their own risky moves that are very reminiscent of the novel as well. Specifically in later episodes, there's a hefty use of realistic backgrounds and details used while having the characters roam around in them. This is practically impossible not to notice in the last two episodes, where certain shots are almost entirely real photos and video, while the flat 2D models of the characters either are very minorly shown or entirely removed. This is a very risky choice, especially with the art style they went with, but it just looks so right. You can tell they put so much care and effort into it. Funnily enough, it's foreshadowed in the opening, which is just constantly traveling through this loop of realistic looking tatami rooms, and the story in general has a lot of foreshadowing that I didn't even catch on to at first, such as Watashi seeing the moths in his room at the beginning of the show to finding the castella in his room eaten. Details like this are present in the novel as well, and it's very easy to miss these things if you aren't either rewatching the show, rereading the novel, or visiting one medium after the next. One thing that both Yuasa and Morimi have in common is that they don't hold your hand. And going back to a previous point, this series has been special to me because of its story, and a lot of it has to do with the protagonist. Everyone calls him Watashi, but he doesn't actually have a given name. It's kind of a trend in Morimi stories for the protagonist to be unnamed, but whether or not you know their name doesn't really matter or change how you identify with them. Instead, it gives you a chance to see even more of yourself in the character. And I am going to get a bit personal here, so if you don't want to hear that, then you can click off, I won't blame you. But to put it as bluntly as possible, possible, I was never exactly a very social person back in high school. I became a lot more antisocial in my years there despite always thinking my life was going to turn around for the better each given semester, and yet I never really jumped at any opportunities or made any for myself. I had a relatively small friend group that I only had because it carried on from elementary school all the way up to high school, and even that number became smaller and smaller as time went on, until I eventually became entirely isolated. I never really committed to my studies, so my grades were never exceptional. I didn't partake in activities or school events. I even skipped out on most school dances. I got into relationships that didn't end well, and so I distanced myself from others more, and overall I felt like shit. I created a life for myself that was entirely devoid of any eventfulness, and I pushed others away to the point where I felt entirely alone. Even though I took a lot of film, theater, and broadcasting classes and programs in school which required a lot more social interaction, I still never really allowed myself to adapt, and I never committed to those things. In general, I was holding myself back a lot. I wasn't enjoying the ride at all. I wasn't looking at my opportunities. Instead, I thought it had all gone past me because I let myself grow so lonely and uncommitted. I became bitter, regretful, and cynical, worrying way too much about the past and my only thoughts about the future being very pessimistic. So, in a way, I saw a lot of myself in Watashi, making him a character I can identify with heavily, both in the novel and the anime. Watashi isn't perfect, and that's what makes him great. Sometimes he's kind of a jerk, sometimes he's too judgmental, and sometimes he mistakes his insecurity for pride. But at the end of the day, he's still a good guy that's just trying to find his way. A guy that doesn't want to keep living this mundane waste of a life that he believes he has. And we've all been there before. We can all relate to Watashi at least a little bit. And that's why I love him so much, because I can relate to him a whole lot. He reminds me a lot of myself back in high school, even though his character is a college student, but hey, there's not that much different there anyways. Just a kid that is way too worried about the future and isn't looking at the now in things. He has a very introspective and fresh take on isolation, depression, and regret. A character in his youth that still has opportunities ahead of him, but is too oblivious to them because he's too busy pinning the blame of his current problems on other factors that he has no control over. But by the end, he realizes his mistake. He realizes what his opportunity was and that these things were never holding him back from anything. It was just him doing it. When he learns to truly appreciate the life he has, that's when his opportunity comes, and when he's able to make a better life for himself. One that he can respect himself for while still acknowledging his past mistakes. One where he's no longer putting everything on hold just because he's too worried about these pointless concerns about the past. And looking at myself now, I'm officially starting film school this year after a bit of a break from education. I have a friend group that I'm very thankful for, and I'm officially striving towards my dreams of being a writer and filmmaker. I look back at my years in high school not as a mistake, but as a learning point. I learned to no longer see things so cynically and instead appreciate what I have around me. I'm not always in the best mood, but overall I can truly say that I am happy with how my life is going, regardless of what's happened in the past. Everything happens for a reason, and as long as you accept that and enjoy the ride, opportunities will come for you to grab. And there are many opportunities that you can make for yourself as long as you aren't so focused on these pointless things. You're still young, and there's no need to worry so much about the past when you have so many more years ahead of you. You don't need to see the years that have gone by as a waste, but rather as just a point to learn from. That is the message that the Tatami Galaxy has told me, and a message that resonates with me deeply, one that I needed to hear. This is a story that I hold a deep appreciation for, and I hope more of you will decide to get into it. While the anime and novel are incredibly different in certain ways, they share lots of similarities and keep the same core themes and messages as one another, making them both very much worth checking out. Even if you have seen the other, both will offer you a new experience and perspective while still telling the same message, which is what I think any great adaptation should do. And that's every reason why I believe the Tatami Galaxy is a very special series, a very special story with very special characters. It may not resonate with everyone on the same level, but in general, it is a great work of art. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who stuck around until the end watching this video. If you did enjoy this, then I would consider subscribing since I make this type of content all the time, at least every 2 weeks. I try to upload every week on every Sunday, but you know, sometimes stuff happens and we get busy. Next week I plan on doing a double review of both Barbie and Oppenheimer, so if you're interested in either of those movies, I'd say subscribe and turn the bell notification on so that you can get notified on when that video comes out. And last but not least, I'd like to say thank you for 4,000 subscribers to everyone who is subscribed to the channel. It really means a lot to me. My end goal for the year is 5,000, which I think is very possible, so if you're not subscribed, well, then do it. And that's really all I have to talk about today. I'll see y'all next time. You guys have a good day.